I don't know if you guys read the Babylon Bee, but in the lead up to the last Super Bowl, they ran a story with the following headline. Conservatives sit down for a relaxing evening of being insulted by every major corporation in America. Now, it's funny because it's true. There's a very amusing but also quite insightful Twitter handle called Woke Capital. If you don't follow it, you really should. And the anonymous guy who runs it, who's basically documenting corporate woke propaganda, sat down for an interview a couple years ago and said, "To date, I know of only one publicly traded company where I couldn't find any woke signaling whatsoever." To help you situate the number, there are 3,500 publicly traded companies in America. Big business has gone woke, or as my generation would say, they're actively taking sides in the culture wars. They've joined the media, Hollywood, the universities. Arthur, you left out the mainline Christian churches as reliable allies on whatever the progressive cause du jour may be. Climate change, gun control, and of course, anything having to do with women, so-called people of color, and the so-called LGBTQ. And conservatives and libertarians, for the most part, are really scratching their heads. They're quite perplexed, right? You hear stuff like, surely this can't be good for business. I mean, how many times have you guys heard a conservative say, but didn't Michael Jordan say that, conservatives buy sneakers too? He was referring to in the 90s, Jesse Helm was being challenged by a Democratic incumbent, and pressure was put on Michael Jordan at the time, who was the closest thing to a deity that America had, to endorse the black Democratic challenger. And Jordan in the back of the bus said to Scottie Pippen, Republicans buy sneakers too, and left it at that. And, conservatives say, well, hold on one second. If they buy sneakers, don't they also buy Gillette razors? Don't they shop at Target? Don't they ride Ubers? And don't they fly Delta? Aren't they all going to go broke if they go woke? My thesis is, I believe they may well in the long run, but not for the reasons that those on the right believe to be true. Allow me to explain what I mean by that. And for that, I just want to break down the dynamics of woke capitalism. So let's start by looking at the right. Big businesses don't need to worry about their right flank. First of all, the people who are most offended by wokeness and find it offensive, i.e. the right broadly speaking, we don't boycott. So conservatives and libertarians on a good day mobilize as voters, as donors, as volunteers, and as activists, but very, very rarely as consumers. There are some exceptions. There was a big show of support for Chick-fil-A after they tried to cancel the owners. Target got some pushback after they changed their bathroom policies. But on the whole, if you're a business, it is a safe bet to ignore your conservative consumers. Also, and Arthur touched upon this, the right, and in particular the Republican Party, remains way too libertarian. Most continue to think that the only threats to liberty in America come from the government and assume that corporations are their friends. Now, here's what's interesting. If you look at the woke left and the Democratic Party, it's the exact opposite dynamics. So big business is their friend. Just look at political donations in 2020. But they continue to view them as the enemy and force them to curry favor with them. And then more importantly, they have the woke mobs on their side. Everyone is afraid of the social justice warriors. My friend Darren Beattie, who was a speechwriter in the White House and successfully uncanceled himself, by the way, tweeted last year, "If you go woke, you won't go broke, but if you go anti-woke, you'll get broken." Just think of what would happen to a corporation that decided to say, support the Second Amendment, oppose the chemical castration of children, or deplore the fact that BLM and Antifa burned down 200 American cities last year. Corporate wokeness makes good business sense. You buy off those who would harm you, and you safely ignore those who won't. And these same dynamics apply internally. Remember, if you're a corporation, you're not just afraid of the woke mobs on the outside, you're afraid of your own employees. It was the employees at Mozilla who wanted to cancel Brandon Ike. It was the employees at Google who wanted to cancel James Damore. I have a buddy who has a startup in San Francisco. He's aged 50 years in the past 5 years trying to get this thing off the ground, fundraising, hiring, traveling. He's got 20-year-old twerps scheduling meetings with him saying, you know, I'm concerned about the lack of diversity at the company. And what does he need to do? Nod along, because if he says a word, it's over for him. Think of it this way. Displays of wokeness are a very small price to pay to be otherwise left alone to run your business. Václav Havel, the great Czech dissident, tells the story under Czechoslovakia during communism of a greengrocer who puts up a sign in his grocery store, "Workers of the world unite." And he puts it up not because he's a believing communist, but because he wants to be left alone to do his business. At the deepest level, displays of wokeness allow corporations and the oligarchs who run them to morally launder their privilege, their wealth, and their corporate nature. So in a democracy, you need to justify inequalities. They inevitably arouse suspicion. If all of us are equal, then why is it that some people have so much money and so much power? Now, all of you will yell out and say, we know the answer, meritocracy. If you work hard and you save and you have a good idea and you develop a good product, you can get ahead. Now, that used to be the answer in America, and it still resonates with those on the right. Regrettably, the left has dealt way too many blows to the idea of meritocracy for it to still be a convincing narrative in the public square. I think Rawls is most responsible for this. You see it, for example, today in the idea that in America today, we call, good fortune, good birth, and hard work the result of privilege. And so basically, Ayn Rand's poetry no longer speaks to us. And this is where social justice comes in handy. If you hold the right opinions on the most pressing social justice issues of the day, if you donate a bit of money, which by the way is a tax write-off, and if you do a handful of strategic diversity hires that you park in your cost centers, you can legitimize your privilege and become one of the good guys. So Jeff Bezos is not an oligarch who underpays his workers and uses unfair business practices to squeeze out the competition. He's a supporter of racial justice. So think of it this way. The more we talk about racial justice, the less we talk about inequality, oligarchy, and corporate power. Corporate America is afraid of Occupy Wall Street. They are not afraid of Black Lives Matter. They're afraid of Bernie Sanders. They're not afraid of Kamala Harris. Why? Because BLM and Kamala Harris can be bought off. So it all seems like the perfect system. Businesses are masquerading as NGOs, and in exchange, they get to make obscene amounts of money and claim the moral high ground. But, and this is my thesis this morning, the corporations who go woke, even performatively, are playing with fire. Wokeness and capitalism can be superficially and temporarily harmonized, but they're ultimately in fundamental contradiction with one another. If you go fully woke, you will eventually go broke. Now, whether they admit it or not, corporations have to turn a profit. And as long as we retain some degree of market freedom in America, companies that don't do well will go out of business and be replaced by competitors. With the exception, perhaps, of the most entrenched monopolies, i.e. Google, they need to remain concerned about efficiency and profitability. The wokies, by contrast, not only don't care one bit about efficiency and profitability, they're actively opposed to each one. What they want is to redistribute power and honor to their preferred victim groups, you know the list, and to punish the oppressors, straight white men. They don't care about qualifications. They just want the good positions to go to people of the right skin color, sexual orientation, gender identity, and race. Now, for the time being, they're bought off with the symbolic displays of wokeness. But what happens when the wokies start demanding diversity, not in the cost centers, HR, marketing, but in the profit centers, engineering, sales, and product development? It is a fact in America that there is a more limited supply of qualified, diverse candidates, especially for senior management or technical positions. We don't like to hear this, we don't like to admit this, but the fact remains that the supply is limited, whatever the reasons may be, and they're complex. But even if you assume the woke reason, that America is racist and preventing blacks and women's and Hispanics and transgender people from getting engineering degrees, there are simply not enough female engineers, black lawyers, and Hispanic CEOs to meet the diversity expectations imposed on all corporations. How long can you keep a company running if you're hiring subpar people? How long can you hire subpar people before the quality of your products start to deteriorate? You also need to remember that the zealous wokies are staunchly anti-capitalist. So BLM right now is happy with the flag and a little payoff here and there. Go to their website. They want, quote, a radical and sustainable redistribution of wealth. A simpler word for that in English is called expropriation. They also want government and corporate reparations. They're not just anti-capitalist, they're anti-science. Because blacks do not excel in the hard sciences, the only possible explanation in America today, because you remember, if there's one thing we are never allowed to do, is to ascribe any agency to victim groups. We have to attack science itself as being racist. Examples are a dime a dozen. I'll just share one quote with you, and this is not some weirdo anonymous Twitter guy. He's the head of the graduate program at the University of Rhode Island. Science, statistics, and technology are all inherently racist because they're developed by racists who live in a racist society, whether they identify as racist or not. Think through the implications of this statement. What will happen if, or should I say when, this way of thinking comes to dominate aeronautics, or oncology, or any other field where the demands of wokeness are contradicted by physical reality? What happens when the boomers and the Xers start to retire, and the corporations are now run by the millennials and the Zoomers who got college as the woke madrasa experience? I don't have the answer to these questions, but I'm growing more and more pessimistic that those in charge will muster the courage to put down the fanatics. I want to end by quoting the most overquoted book on the right, 1984. Everyone remembers this one, but they don't remember the corollary. 2 plus 2 equals how much according to the party? 5. And because the party has all the power and everyone is afraid of them, no one contradicts them, and Big Brother says 2 plus 2 equals 5, and it turns out that it equals 5. There's one exception. Physical facts could not be ignored. In philosophy or religion or ethics or politics, 2 and 2 might make 5. But when one was designing a gun or an aeroplane, they had to make 4. Inefficient nations were always conquered sooner or later, and the struggle for efficiency was inimical to illusions. What will happen for America to give up its illusions? Thank you.